Hello and welcome to chapter 2 of Queen of Darkness. So let's carry on. So Rhianna and Aleri had just been taken in by Boudica. So chapter 2, Fierce Looking Women. After a while, the queen rose from her couch to leave the feast house, bidding Rhianna and Aleri, bidding Rhianna and Aleri to follow her. Prasutagus watched them go, a look of amusement on his face. "Leaving so soon, my love," he called out, "and without even a good-night kiss for your lord and master?" The bodyguards laughed, and Rhianna glanced at the queen to see how she would react. Boudica simply ignored them. The air had grown colder outside, and the royal place was full of darkness, with only a white sliver of moon and a sprinkling of stars in the sky to light their way. Rhianna held Aleri close, but it was just a short walk to the queen's house, and once they were inside, warmth folded around them like a blanket. The hearth was bigger than that of the feast house, and the logs gave off a sweet smell as they burned. "Sit here by the fire," said the queen, pulling up a pair of thick, bracken-stuffed cushions for the girls. "We'd better get you fed. Tegan, Maeva, where are you?" Rhianna sat down, with Aleri snuggled in beside her. It was hard to believe they were actually inside the queen's house, Rhianna thought, yet it was true. There were fewer lamps than in the feast house, and the shadows were thicker. Rhianna saw strange shapes hanging from the roof beams, and realised they were bundles of dried herbs, stoppered pots and jars, strings of bird feathers, animal skulls. The queen was well known for making powerful healing salves and potions to cure illnesses. Two young women appeared out of the shadows. Boudica's daughters were older than Rhianna. Tegan, perhaps 18 summers, and Maeva, 15. They both looked like their mother, although Maeva was small and slight, and her hair was less fiery. They both had open, friendly faces, and were dressed in fine woolen gowns. Tegan's was the bright red of holly berries in winter, and Maeva's was a deep blue. "Ask the servants to fetch food and drink for our new friends," said the queen. "Rhianna and her little sister Aleri will be living with us from now on." "Of course," said Tegan, smiling at them. "There's some stew, I think." The stew was brought to them in bowls, and there was bread as well, and mare's milk with honey. Rhianna gave her sister a nudge, as if to say, "I told you I'd make sure you got some supper tonight," but Aleri was still already eating and didn't notice. Rhianna smiled and started eating too, the food warming her more than the fire. "So, who taught you about the goddess?" said the queen at last. She was sitting beside the sisters, the light of the hearth flames dancing in her eyes and glinting off her torqued bracelets. She had been forgotten by the tribe since the Romans came. "Our mother," said Rhianna. "She was not of the Iceni, but of the Brigantes. Our father was restless as a young man, and they met when he was on his travels in the north. Mother always swore by the goddess and taught us to do the same." "Ah, that would explain it," said the queen, smiling. "Women still have power among the Brigantes. Even the Romans are scared of their queen, Cartimandua, and yet the men of our tribe refuse to worship the goddess as they used to." Each tribe had its own ways, and there had often been cattle raids between them, or even war. But according to Rhianna's mother, at one time every tribe in the island of Britannia had worshipped the goddess, and each was ruled by a powerful queen. Now it was just the Brigantes who still lived like this. There had been kings, but a man had to marry a queen to become one, and queens chose their husbands. But then the men in many tribes had begun to turn against the goddess and worship lesser gods in their own image. Soon there were even men priests called druids, and wherever they seized power, they ended the rule of women. Only a few tribes kept the druids out, the Iceni among them. But change had come to the Iceni too. Boudica had chosen her first husband, Connor, the father of her daughters, just as queens of the Iceni had always done. But he had died fighting the Romans when they'd come up from the south 13 summers ago. The Romans had won, but they had agreed to let the tribe remain free, if they upheld certain conditions. They said the Iceni had to pay them a tribute every year. This was to be made up of many gold and silver coins, 10 wagon loads of wheat and 10 of barley, 100 fine horses, and the same number of cattle and sheep. The Romans had also declared that the tribe must be ruled by a king. They chose Prasutagus because he had spent many years in their lands across the sea, in Gaul mostly, but he often boasted that he had visited the city of Rome itself. He was more Roman in his beliefs than Iceni, and the Romans knew he would follow their ways. They believed that only men should rule, and although they worshipped some goddesses, their most powerful gods, such as Jupiter and Mars, were male. The nobles of the tribe agreed that they must do what the Romans wanted, and told Boudica she had to marry him. Rhianna remembered her mother and father arguing about it often, her father saying it was right for men to rule because they were warriors, her mother saying that women were better rulers and could also be fierce warriors. Suddenly, Rhianna felt her eyes prickling with hot tears. Thinking about her parents had opened a great black hole of grief within her, and she tumbled into it, wishing they were still alive, knowing they were gone forever. She dropped her bowl and let her tears flow. "Hush, child," said Boudica, pulling her close. Rhianna glanced at Aleri and saw that her sister was asleep, curled on the cushion, clutching her empty bowl. "As soon as I heard you call on the goddess, I knew it was a sign. She has brought us together for a reason, Rhianna," the queen said softly. "It must have been hard for you, but your dark time is over. You and your sister will be safe with me, I swear." Rhianna let herself be held, and soon she was asleep beside her sister. For Rhianna, the next few days seemed like a dream come true, or like one of the stories told round the hearth on cold winter nights to make everyone smile, a tale of rags to riches, of despair turned to joy. The queen gave Rhianna and Aleri new clothes, beautiful gowns like those Tegan and Maeva wore, and their own special sleeping place, with blankets and thick furs to wrap themselves in at night. They ate well too, as Boudica's daughters delighted in bringing them the best food. On the morning of the 5th day, Rhianna approached the queen. Boudica was sitting by the hearth, talking to one of the young women who also lived in her house. Rhianna had noticed the women straight away. There were a dozen of them, all beautiful but fierce-looking as well. She had asked Tegan about them, and she had said they were just body servants to the queen. But Rhianna felt they were more than that. They were like wolves who had magically been transformed into women. "My lady," Rhianna said nervously, "would it be all right if I went back to my old house today? We left some things behind that I would like to collect." The queen and the young woman stopped talking and turned to her. "You don't have to ask my permission," Rhianna said the queen. "You can come and go as you please. We Iceni are still mostly a free people. Isn't that right, Garwen?" "We are, and proud of it," said the young woman, her voice warm and strong. Garwen had clear blue eyes and black hair and wore an ash-coloured gown. "Mind you, I have a feeling you might need a little help with that stepmother of yours," said the queen. "I think you'd better go with Rhianna, Garwen." Rhianna almost said it wasn't necessary, and that she could handle Magunna herself. But then she thought, why not? She had always faced her stepmother alone, and it would be good to have support, especially when with someone like Garwen. So she thanked the queen and went to check on her sister. Aleri was more than happy to stay with Maeva, the two of them having taken a liking to each other. Soon, Rhianna and Garwen were walking through the royal place, the muddy tracks busy with people and squawking hens, a dog barking in the distance. It was a bright winter's day, with a sharp, cold breeze coming from the west, so Rhianna was glad of her new cloak. How strange that life could change so swiftly, she thought. 5 days ago, she and her sister had walked in the opposite direction, cast out of their home with nothing. Rhianna smiled. Magunna was in for a surprise. It turned out, however, that Rhianna was in for a surprise herself. She didn't bother to knock on the doorpost like a stranger when she arrived at her old home, and just pushed through the cowhide door covering. Inside, Magunna was sitting by the hearth, kneading flatbread dough on a wooden board, with smoke from the burning logs curling in the light streaming down through the roof hole. But someone else was sitting by the hearth. A man called Segavax, a friend of Rhianna's father. Segavax was big and fair, and Rhianna had never liked him much. She had liked him even less after the summer gathering. He had been the one driving the chariot that made her father swerve. Magunna scowled, but Segavax only glanced at Rhianna and concentrated on eating flatbread he'd just taken from a stone at the edge of the hearth. Rhianna felt Garwen push through the door covering to stand a little way beside her. "You didn't waste much time, did you?" said Rhianna, glaring at Magunna. "I should have realised what you were up to, and you were up to something. You wanted us out so you could move this pig in. How could you? It's because of him that our father died." Sagovax paused in his steady chewing and turned to stare at Rhianna with narrowed eyes. He always wore tunics without sleeves, so he could show off his arms, with their bulging muscles covered in swirling blue tattoos from shoulder to wrist. "So what? You can't do anything about it," Magunna said, smirking. She had scraggy black hair, mean eyes, and thin lips. Rhianna had never understood why her father liked her. "What do you want, anyway? And who's your friend?" "I want the things that belong to Eleri and me," said Rhianna, ignoring her second question. Garwen said nothing, but she did step forward. "Our mother's jewels," said Rhianna. "Her rings, the keepsakes she brought with her from the north." "What, these?" said Magunna, raising her hands and grinning. She was wearing several rings as well as a silver bracelet, all of which Rhianna recognised as her mother's. "Well, you can forget it. They're mine, whether you like it or not." "Oh, no, they're not," Rhianna said, her voice rising. "Give them to me, or—" "Or what, little girl?" growled Sagovax. He'd finished eating and slowly rose to his feet. "I think you and your friend had better leave before you get hurt." He advanced on Rhianna and Garwen until he loomed over them, his arms outstretched, a big grin on his face. Rhianna backed towards the door, but suddenly Garwen ducked to one side and kicked out at the man's legs, sweeping them from under him. Sagovax crashed to the floor, and Garwen knelt down, grabbing his hair and pulling his head back. Rhianna was shocked to see she had a dagger in her hand and that she was pressing the blade hard against the side of his throat. Magunna screamed, and Garwen looked up at her. "I am Garwen, body servant to the Queen, but more importantly, I have a knife at your man's throat, and I will cut it wide open, unless you give Rhianna what is rightfully hers. Quickly now." Magunna didn't argue, and soon Rhianna had what she had come for. She took a few other things too. An old silver ring of her father's, her mother's comb, and a little bone-handled knife her mother had always used when preparing food. Garwen released Sagovax at last, and he sat up, rubbing a cut on his neck. "Ready, Rhianna?" said Garwen, and Rhianna nodded. They turned to leave, but Rhianna couldn't help taking one last look before she went out of the door. Magunna stood by the hearth, her eyes burning with more hatred than ever. And that is the end of Chapter 2.